What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdel-Jabbar. What's going on, brother?
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. I can't complain.
Heard you celebrated a birthday recently.
Yeah, I did. I celebrated a birthday, a very special birthday. The big, I don't even want to say the number. You could probably imagine what it is if it's the
75.
I'm turning 12.
just got my first beer.
Turning 16. Yeah, I turned 30 yesterday. So that's one of the reasons why the episodes have been a little less frequent this week, just because I've had we both had busy weeks, and apologize for usually we get 2 episodes out a week. I think last week we only got 1 out. So I apologize for that, but we're getting back on schedule, even though this one is late, because usually we do either Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday. So
we're back on track.
We're back on track. We're getting back on track. But I was planning on taking the entire week off from covering politics. I was going to still do it, but I wasn't going to cover it in great detail unless there was something really serious that happened. I'm actually working on history, like some more history podcast. But all of a sudden everyone starts freaking out, and everyone starts freaking out over Iran and the U.S.
Yep.
And apparently we're going to war with Iran, or, that's the big,
that's the big question.
That's the big question. Are we going to war with Iran? A lot of anti-war activists have been pushing that. They're like, oh, no, we're going to war with Iran. Oh, no. Oh, no. Did I sound like the Family Guy?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, we're going to war with Iran.
Oh, not Iran. But, yeah, apparently, I started looking on Twitter, and people are freaking out about going to war with Iran. And, I spoke about this about a week ago or so, with the U.S. Not extending the waivers to countries that have been importing oil from Iran, which are mainly China. China is the country. China is the country that imports the most oil from them, and they didn't renew their sanctions. So tensions have kind of flared up since. I mean, tensions with Iran have always been very high, and they've definitely have reached a higher level when Trump became president, and especially when John Bolton became National Security Advisor.
That's right.
So it's been gradually just there's been more tension between the two countries, and it's been building up for a while. I'll just lead off right now. I don't think this is the breaking point. I don't think we're going to go over everything, but I don't think this is
this isn't it. Yeah.
I don't think this is it. I think there's plenty of more things to happen in the future before the U.S. actually does something like a land invasion in Iran. That would be nuts. That would be nuts to think that could happen in a week. And I doubt it will happen in a week. But I should probably go. Do you have anything to say, or do you want me?
I mean, I agree with you. I also think I'm suspicious of a lot of this shit too. We'll definitely go over it in great detail, but I think, for our listeners and for our viewers, that might not quite get it and understand what's going on, it might be helpful to just give a little bit of context on, like a brief overview of Iran and U.S. relations.
Hezbollah. Hezbollah. They fund Hezbollah. Proxies. Hezbollah. Proxy war. Oh, they're funding the Houthis. That's the relationship with the U.S. and Iran. No, it's not. So the thing about Iran and U.S. relations is that I think the most important thing you have to understand is that the U.S. and Iran used to be allies. They used to be best friends. Iran was the U.S.'s best ally in the Middle East, and you have to ask yourself what happened. In the 1970s we were allies. And then in the 1980s, we hated each other. So what exactly happened in that time period? Well, you have to get a good grasp of the history of Iran, or at least the modern day Iran. Obviously, Iran, their history goes back
the beginning of time.
2,500 years. It's one of the
Yeah,
early.
more than that, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's an early advanced civilization. And there's obviously great pride in that. But what happened is where I would start the story when explaining like the modern Iranian, um, the U.S. relationship with Iran now is I would start in the 18th, 19th century when the British started when they discovered oil in Iran. Which is like an interesting story is that the British started looking for oil because I believe it was Shell Oil.
Shell Oil Company.
Shell Oil Company was purchased by the Dutch, and they lost majority of control over it. So they started frantically looking for oil, and they found oil. This is interesting. The reason how they discovered oil in Iran is that they were looking at history books. So they were going back in time. They were looking at mainly sources from like the 1200s, and they discovered that countries in the Middle East were actually using oil to light lamps.
So pretty much the same way that Samwell Tarly figured out that Jon Snow is actually Aegon Targaryen then, right?
Don't spoil it. But yeah, so they discovered that, and then they're like, okay, let's go to the Middle East and find oil. So they literally sent people to walk around the desert until they stepped in it. And that's how they found it, because like back in the day in like the Middle East has a lot of oil.
Yeah.
And you could just walk around. You could walk around and just be like, bloop,
find it.
And then you step, there's oil. It's either oil or water that you're stepping into. And there's probably more oil than water in the desert.
Yeah.
So they set up a deal. So this is like another interesting part, and I don't want to go too off track, but so at this time, the Brits were pushing opium to a very high degree, and the rulers of Iran, I think they were called the Hajas or the Harjas. They were huge opium addicts. So they kind of used the opium trade as leverage to get access with Iran, and they ended up making this deal, this oil concession where the Brits would go and do everything, and they would keep 90% of the oil, while Iran would get 10%, even though it was like Iranian land or Persian land.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this really sweet deal, and they made the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And after that, they after World War I, they were going to lose it. Like Iran was slowly drifting to a point where they were going to lose that type of control over the country. And in the 1950s, Britain came to Truman, and they're like, "Hey, Iran just has a democracy now. They overthrew their monarchy. They have a democracy, and they they selected some guy, and he kicked us out. It's Mossadegh, and they kicked out the monarch. They elected Mossadegh, and they had they kicked the British out as well. So the Brits came. I'm repeating myself. But the Brits, they asked America to overthrow the government, and America waited until the Korean War was over, and they created a plan with the CIA, with Kermit Roosevelt, to overthrow the government, and they did. And the way they overthrew it was that they hired protesters in the street to pretend like they were supporters of Mossadegh, and they weren't actually supporters of Mossadegh. They were just paid kind of cronies, where you just hired them to crawl
they were like the Russian bots of Iran, basically.
The Russian bots are like, maybe it could be anything. You know how like there's always I'm always suspect of like these large organized protests, like both with like Antifa and like alt-right groups. I'm always kind of curious if there's people in there that are there to just cause more trouble in the
right. Well, probably because of how effective Kermit Roosevelt's like strategy was, right? Like he wrote the fucking playbook. Like he proved that you can pay off some people and basically create some insurgents to, drum up a bunch of, riots and shit, and then kind of direct things in the direction that you want them to. I mean, they bought up like newspapers in Iran to like print propaganda and a bunch of other stuff. It was super interesting. But so what happened then? Like, we get people to do the protests and like overthrow the government. Now what?
All right. So, a long story short, I'll skip ahead. They install the Shah. They overthrow the government and they install the Shah. Shah's a monarch. He's a dictator. He's not very popular, and we had a great relationship with the Shah, but he didn't have a great reputation in Iran. And eventually, he was overthrown. He was overthrown while he left for medical care in the States, and ever since then, the U.S. has had a really toxic relationship with Iran. But the thing is, though, like history starts in the 1950s because we overthrew their democracy.
Right.
So they had the population had a reason to be resentful.
To dislike us, right.
To dislike us. It wasn't like it wasn't because of radical Islam. Like it was because of deep tensions between both parties that lasted for many years. It wasn't because like
regime change, basically.
They're not civilized because they believe in Muhammad. Like, that's like, give me a break. Like, that's not it. It's because we meddled with their elections and they got resentful of it, and there is a despot who was in charge of the country for a while.
Oh, that sounds awfully familiar.
So after that, we get. Are you making a slight hand at Trump?
Yeah.
I don't want none of
that. It was too easy. Sorry.
I know. It wasn't opening. All right. So what happened was that after that happened, we went to Saddam Hussein and we kind of egged him on to invade Iran, and he did. And there was a 10-year war, or 1980 to 1988 or 89. There was a very brutal war in the Middle East. It was one of the biggest wars maybe ever in the region. And it was like World War I in the Middle East. It was just like there was trench battlefield, there was gas attacks, child soldiers everywhere. Like Iran was literally Iran's not a great place. Like, no. I always try to make
they've got their problems.
I always try to state this whenever I talk about Iran. Like, I am not a fan of like the government in Iran at all. Yeah. I've never been, and they've done really bad things. Like during the Iranian-Iraq war, they would throw 12-year-olds in like the trenches. Like they'd be like, "You're old now. Put helmet on," and like they throw them in and
take this gun.
They figure it out. At 12, like you can find so many. If you type in just like child soldier Iran, there's just so many pictures of like child soldiers in the Iranian army. It's really crazy. Meanwhile, Iraq is being funded by the U.S., so they have all the latest and greatest gear. Like they have goggles and all this cool shit.
Cool tanks. Artillery, yeah.
But the war ends up being a stalemate because Iran and Iraq, I guess it kind of evens out. You know, Iran has a much bigger population. Iraq had
better tech,
military equipment, but neither one could like conquer each other. And
it was a stalemate, right?
It was just a stalemate. It was just a brutal. It was brutal. Like Iraq was winning in the beginning, and then Iran came back. I think Iran at one point felt like they were destined to take over the rest of the country. It was just like, two bad guys fighting each other. But the war was brutal. Both countries were kind of ruined for a while, which softened up Iraq, which really like made it easy for the U.S. to beat them in a war right afterwards. And I mean, the U.S. would have beat them regardless, but it made it even easier, the fact that Iraq was like just came out of a decade-long brutal war. And Iranian and American relations have always been really bad. In the 90s, Bill Clinton had a policy called dual containment. And dual containment was a policy where they would contain Iran and they would contain Iraq. So they, both countries were perceived as threats. It was dual containment. And what George Bush when he was elected, he ruined everything because
W.
because he went and then he destroyed Iraq, and Iraq and in Iran, the majority of Iraq is about 60% Shiite, 60 to 70% Shiite. Iran is about 90% Shiite, or 80 to 90% Shiite. And they became the biggest influencer in Iraq right afterwards. Because of course, like why, like it makes perfect sense. So we ended up empowering Iran in that region because we took out the government in Iraq and we put for all intents and purposes, a Shiite chauvinist government in its place.
Mm-hmm.
So of course they're going to create good relations. They're going to have a strong relationship with Iran, and we get upset about that because we don't like Iran. It's kind of like the girlfriend that broke up with you in college that broke your heart and you never got over it. You can never get over it. It could be like 10 years later and you'll be like, oh, her boyfriend probably has a small dick. You know what I mean? Like, it's like that girl that you're still like, and Iraq kind of served Iraq, ironically enough, kind of served as the rebound girl.
Yep. And then we
then he
cut
ended
that
up
off.
tossing her out like she was nothing.
It ain't nothing to cut that.
Like, you ain't nothing, bitch.
Yeah, we cut her off.
And then she goes and starts hanging out with your ex, and then you're like, oh, the girls are trying to get back at me. What's that movie called? Is it called like
Mean Girls? I don't know.
No, it's Revenge Against John Hampton or something. Like
Four
Girls. I forget what it's called. It's like a teen flick. So,
well, that kind of brings us to now, right? So that's pretty good context.
That's a stage for the modern day relationship with Iran and the U.S. and Iran. It's there's a lot of turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do, like our policy towards Iran has always been to put sanctions on them when we're unhappy with them. And we are unhappy with Iran for different reasons at different times. Right. Sometimes it's because of foreign lobbies. Sometimes it's because
of oil.
Sometimes it can be whatever. But what we use as the main pretext to condemn Iran is their funding of different proxy forces across the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And the main culprits are typically Hezbollah. And the reason why Hezbollah is important is because Hezbollah is right on the border of Israel. And they fought a war with Israel in 2006, and they won the war.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always they're right on the border of Israel. They're in southern Lebanon. So we labeled Hezbollah as a terrorist group. So it's there's that. There's that.
There's also like the big elephant in the room, and that's like the nuclear aspect of it, right? So that's one of our pretexts against Iran is that they are working on
one as well.
Some nuclear weapons or energy or both. Who knows? They're problematic because they're always saying death to Israel and death to America and shit like that. So like you gotta be like, all right, well maybe you shouldn't have nuclear weapons. That's the obvious retort to that. But at the same time, it's I think what you pointed out and what you did a really good job at explaining is that we've been like in this like love-hate, mostly hate relationship with Iran since well before they were thinking about making bombs, So
yeah, it wasn't like, oh, they're about these crazy radical Islamists are about to get this nuclear bomb and there's going to be a reign of terror on earth.
Yeah. No,
I think that's the vision. I think that's a lot of people from like the modern day, right. I think have that vision where they're like, oh no, these crazy Muslims are going to get a bomb and they're going to kill us all.
It's just, it lacks context and it's easy, right? That's an easy boogeyman, right?
Dude, I remember I saw this tweet the other day. It was tweet or something. It was some meme. I forget what platform it was on. I don't think it was on Twitter because it was like
maybe Reddit.
It probably would have gotten banned, but it was just like this tweet that went through like all this stuff about Islam, and I was reading it, and I was like, this is pretty gross. Like I was like, this is kind of a gross. I don't think the person should be like banned, but I'm like reading this, and it's like, oh, Muslims are like dirty, like just crazy shit. And I was like, this is pretty gross. I forget. I wish I had this up, but it was like Muslims.
It's not worth putting on our platform.
Pillage,
Yeah,
do all this stuff, and just throwing like the geist of Islam on all. You know what I mean? It was just collectively condemning Muslim people. And I think a lot of people on the right collectively condemn Iran as part of that radical terror group, with groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and stuff like that.
mm-hmm.
I think it's fine to collectively condemn Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Those groups are terrible.
Right.
And there's a lot of barely bad aspects of Iran as well. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same thing. Like, like Iran's not going around and chopping people's heads off and putting them on spikes. You know, they're a state actor that has different foreign policy interests in the U.S.
Right.
We clash over that.
Right.
And the U.S. uses different pretexts to garner up support, to have aggressive policy towards them. The main ones being what you said, nuclear ambitions, and their funding of different proxy forces to gain influence around the Middle East.
Correct.
With the nuclear energy and stuff like that, there really isn't any evidence to suggest that they're trying to build a nuclear bomb. From what I've seen, most of it is just them they want to build a civilian nuclear program,
right?
Which makes perfect sense, because if you're an oil exporter, you want to export more oil. So
I mean, it's the same thing as Saudi Arabia. We talked about this in our Saudi nuclear deal episode. You know, we're treating Saudi Arabia with a different set of rules as we are, Iran, and they basically have the same problem that they're trying to solve with the same solution. We are an oil exporter. We can't completely subsist on our oil revenues. We need to be able to generate our own energy from independent sources and not get high on our own supply. Therefore, we want to develop nuclear energy. And the trouble there for both Saudi Arabia and Iran is that the technology that you would need to create a civilian energy program with nuclear power is very similar to the technology that you would use to create nuclear weapons. And it's not a far offshoot. The problem here is that we're like, yeah, Saudi Arabia, you can totally have that, and Iran, no, you totally can't. And we're coloring it with this like radical Islamist thing, which to your point, is gross. But at the same time, Iran's not the best actor either, but neither is Saudi Arabia, and neither is a lot of other fucking countries that have this capability anyway. So it's complicated. It's not super simple. It's not just like, here's a boogeyman, here's a straw man, let's set them up so that we can crush them,
And I say this all the time, Iran sucks. Like,
yeah,
they suck. Like, the government sucks in Iran.
Right.
They do a lot of really dumb stuff too.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you can't blame other countries for acting aggressively on them.
Right.
So like something that I really heard about they're invited into these countries, usually when there's a revolution taking place or there's some type of war going on or chaos. They're usually called in by other governments to help them out with the problems. And that's what happened in Syria. And I heard reports when Iranian soldiers were coming in, Syria's majority Sunni. They have an Alawite kind of upper class, and they have like a coalition of minorities that kind of run the top levels of the government. But the majority of the country is like 60-70% Sunni. And I think even more, it's probably 70% Sunni. And there were Iranian officers trying to convert the Sunnis to Shiite. And it was a problem.
That's a problem. Yeah.
I heard a lot that the Syrian army didn't like dealing with the Iranians. Like it was like not a pleasant thing to do. And there's small cases like that. Obviously, that's not like a huge deal to an American. Like, what the hell does an American care? What these
what
countries are
flavor
doing?
of Islam they
Yeah, it's just an interesting thing to think about. And they also do kind of meddle around in areas, and they do things that are questionably intended to provoke the U.S.
Right.
To respond to them. But like nothing they do is worth like actually having a hostile, like an incredibly hostile foreign policy. Like
Right.
it really makes no sense to like wave the finger and
right
wag the tail.
That kind of, which is what brings us to why we're having this episode today, right? Like earlier this week, I texted you and I'm like, yo, what's going on in Iran that is so big that we're all of a sudden pulling our folks out of, the Iraq embassy, that we're sending carrier strike groups, and that there's whispers about sending 120,000 troops to the area. Like, what did Iran do? And here's where it gets super weird. So last week, we sent in a carrier strike group, and for those who aren't familiar with that, it's a giant aircraft carrier, or super carrier, if you will, plus all of the support vessels that go along with it. They sent in a B-2 bomber group, which are very large bombing airplanes, to the region to respond to, quote, threats that Iran was going to do something to U.S. interests in Iraq and potentially Syria. It's a little bit questionable, right? But I don't disagree with responding to threats, even if they're not very strong ones. That we can't have like a second Benghazi happening again, right? If there's a credible threat and the U.S. government says so, we should probably look into that. What's weird is that later on, then we saw 4 ships in the Straits of Hormuz, and of course, the Straits of Hormuz is the channel of water that is separating, say, Saudi Arabia and Iran, right? It's the largest shipping lane for oil and many other things in the world, and 4 tankers were damaged, right? They had holes in their ships while passing through. It's unclear how they got those holes. We might show a picture right now for those who are watching. But it's, they're sizable holes, but we don't have any video evidence or picture evidence of like how it happened. Nobody really knows what's going on. The ships weren't sunk. And furthermore, the major countries in the area that ship oil aren't reducing the number of shipments that they're making. So it's weird, right? If it was a credible threat and 4 ships, got bombed, then you would think that everybody would be on high alert and be like, nah, chill out. Like, we're not going to ship for a little bit because this is dangerous. But they're still doing what they're doing. Meanwhile, on the U.S. side, we're like, all right, cool. We're going to pull everybody out of the Iraq embassy, all non essential folks. And yeah, we might send 120,000 troops over there. This is like the whispers, the rumors that we're hearing in the DC mill here. And then Trump goes on TV and says, well, hey, we don't have any plans of that, but if we did, we'd send a hell of a lot more, which is fucking weird.
Which would be correct, because you would need to if you were.
Yeah, I mean, we would need to, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about those numbers in general and why that's unrealistic.
Let me talk, because there's a siren in the background on you. Mm-hmm. I think what's really important though is to realize, and if you happen to be maybe in front of a computer or on your phone, and if you can pull up a map, I think it's very important to like visualize where Iran is on a map. So Iran is a huge landmass. It's big. It has 80 million people, and you'll see on the south of it, it's right on the border of the Strait of Hormuz. That is the most important choke point in the world as far as global oil supply. It's the most important energy shipping lane in the world, period. So if that shuts down, it would really raise the price of oil to a very high amount, and not just like 50%. Now I'm getting it, Danny.
All right,
Now
well,
50
mine just stopped, so we're good.
50%, and let me just finish. So it would go up like 800%. And another thing that's very interesting, I think I'll get into my next point later. All right, what were you saying again? Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's fine. It happens. So on that troop number, because I do like the military portions of our show. So I was curious because like 120,000 troops is the same number of troops that we sent into Iraq, right? So that number is like super, I don't know, like don't use that number,
Yeah,
like
that's a
that
good
number
point.
is, like that. I mean, I was already kind of getting at the parallels between the Iraq war lead up and this possible drumming up and saber rattling here in Iran, right? And the number of troops that he sent initially to Iraq was 120,000. Don't use that number. Like don't talk about that number. It's triggering. So that's my first point. Second point is 120,000 troops is a lot of fucking people. Like I looked up our current standards on the wiki, and we've got 1.3 active military personnel, right? 1.3 million. But when we talk about troops, we're talking about ground troops, right? So we can mostly exclude Navy and Air Force and of course Coast Guard. So if we sent more than 120,000, like we only have 184,000 Marines. So if we're sending more than 120,000, a hell of a lot more, we're talking about sending all of the Marines to Iran, like all of them, right? And if what's a hell of a lot more, right? So double, right? So that would be all of the Marines and a sizable portion of the army, right? And that's just strategically not a good idea. I agree with you fully, though, that we would need a hell of a lot more than 120,000 people to invade Iran, right? Like, so as you were pointing out, it's a large fucking country. It's mountainous, it's rugged, and they're armed, and they've got a lot of people over there. And it would take a minute for us to move that many troops out there. Like, they would be ready, So on the one hand, we definitely would need more than 120,000 people. On the other hand, it's not realistic to send more than 120,000 people because we'd have to pull people from all over the world, like very important spots, like on the DMZ line for North Korea, right? We'd have to pull people out of like fucking everywhere that we are, basically, because we're talking about a big chunk of our armed forces. It's just logistically kind of unfeasible. So it's part of the reason why I think we can make the argument at this point that now is not that time. We're not going to war. Like it's not going to happen.
And that's a very interesting point you brought up about the number of troops. That being, there was 120,000 troops on the initial invasion in Iraq. And I guess it does kind of hold some symbolic value, like, 120,000 troops are coming. That means invasion, right?
Right.
Iraq and Iran are totally different countries. Like there's nothing comparable about the two at all. Besides they're both being in the Middle East, there's nothing about the terrain or what the military operations that would be that are similar.
Right.
It's completely different animal.
That's
Iraq,
right.
I think they had about 4 aircraft carriers in the initial invasion. I think they had about 4 aircraft carriers.
I don't know those stats, so let's go with that.
And so 120,000 troops. Iraq is a desert. It's a big, south of Iraq is a big desert. You could walk into the country. There's natural airstrips everywhere. You can conquer Iraq in a couple of weeks. Also with Iraq.
Well, we didn't do a very good job of it. We've been there for like 18 years or some stupid shit like that. Yeah.
You can conquer a country quickly. You can't occupy it. Occupying it's a different thing. We conquered Iraq very quickly. We still are having it's hard to occupy.
We're having a rough time. Yeah.
But what happened, another reason why it was easy to conquer or to invade was because there was already this kind of sectarian split within the country.
That's right.
that you could kind of play favorites and play identity politics with in that country.
Mm-hmm.
So Saddam Hussein was a Sunni and he was a dictator and he wasn't liked. He wasn't very popular with the majority Shiite population.
That's right. Right.
And you saw that with
and you capitalize on it. Yeah.
We capitalized that by putting Shiites in power, by promising that they would be in power if they would be helpful in the war effort. And you would see that I remember hearing a story about in Desert Storm, there was all these Shiite commanders that were surrendering immediately during the war. So there was already kind of like that ticking time bomb that was set in place in the country with different sectarian groups as well as ethnic groups like the Kurds in the north that we can kind of play off of. In Iran, we don't have those type of advantages. Right. Iran, first of all, the terrain it's like Vietnam and Afghanistan. It's just mountains and it's
rugged.
It's rugged terrain. Like if you
it's hard to move around there. It's like hard to like get your troops there. There's no natural airfields like in Iraq. Yeah.
Type in Iran satellite map. And like I think it's really important to visualize this. If you look at Iran's satellite map, it looks like Utah. It looks like Colorado from the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just mountains and grassland. It just you can't.
It's a bunch of shit.
It's a bunch of shit.
Yeah.
A bunch of shit to hide in. And the other thing is that the population centers in Iran, a lot of them are in the north of the country.
Right.
And why that's significant is because you're going to have to go over that terrain to get to these major population centers.
Right. Especially if you're coming from the sea in the south, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you're coming through the Straits of Hormuz and you want to push your way north, like you have to go through all of that shit. And it's a massive country and it's a tough, rugged terrain. And that's why, like, honestly, so there's a lot of things that kept bringing me back to this Iraq war buildup, you know, some parallels there. You know, the big elephant in the room is John Bolton. Like Bolton was part of the engineers of the Iraq war. Nobody can question that, right? John Bolton has been saying for the last 10 years that he supports regime change in Iran again. And then, you know, we look at things like how the news media and also how like even certain senators of you know and Congress people that are war hawks, how they talk about and introduce the idea of conflict in the Middle East, right? And there's this one guy that I got a fucking bone to pick. Hopefully we can just grab this like interview with him because like when I saw it, I was just disgusted because it was stupid. His name is Tom Cotton. He is the Republican senator of Arkansas. This dude gets on a news interview, and you know the interviewer says, you know, do you think we can take Iran? And he's like, yep, like immediately. And she's like, whoa, that's crazy. You didn't even have to think about that. He's like, yeah, we hit them once and that's it. And that would be the last time we'd hit them. And it's like, dude, clearly you're not thinking about this. So either you're an idiot and you haven't like seen like a map and you don't know jack shit about like military strategy, or you're trying to make it sound easier than it is on purpose to justify and make it an easier way in. And I don't like that. Right?
Yeah, it's either he's a dumbass or he's being deceptive.
Right. And I mean, like we've proven already that Iran could hold their own in a fight against us. I mean, last year there was a lieutenant general of retired lieutenant general of the Marine Corps. His name was Paul Van Riper, and they did a like a war game. We hold war games to like, you know, make pretend and see what would happen. So we did a war game, Iran versus the U.S. And guess what? He won. He did some dirty shit, you know, but that's how they would fight us. Like, and I in that simulation, Iran won.
Yeah, and like I think we can do an entire episode on this topic because it's really interesting about like what exactly he did. And
yeah, we should actually.
We should actually do an entire episode on this, but I'll kind of leave it at he treated he was commanding his military in a very desperate fashion, meaning he would like command suicide bombings with boats and stuff like that. He was doing what he would think that Iran would do if they are in a desperate situation of being invaded. And he was using he was using the labor that was available to him and the material that was available to him.
Mm-hmm. And the terrain, frankly. Yeah.
Yeah. And if he can think of it, if he can think of that stuff, then an Iranian general can think of the same thing.
Right.
So there's every reason to believe that Iran would fight in a desperate fashion if he tried to invade them. The only other option, if you're going to invade them, like, you have to expect tens of thousands of casualties. Yep. No one's going to stomach that. No one, like, there's not. You may, even if you're the most hawkish person in the goddamn planet, if you're just a total war hawk, I love, I think Iraq war was a good thing. I supported Vietnam. Like, if you're just a complete war hawk, I don't see you celebrating in a war with Iran when your neighbor's kid dies, or when your nephew dies, or whatever casualty.
When your grandkid dies, right?
When your best friend's son is a POW in Iran and gets raped in prison and comes back and he has mental problems for it, or has severe psychological problems from the trauma that he went through. That's what would happen.
That's right.
It's like I'm not going to go into this, but like, there's going to be some brutal consequences, not only for the soldiers on the ground, but for the entire world. All right, sirens are coming.
Yeah, that siren keeps like interrupting your speech. Yeah, dude, I was suspicious about this shit. Another thing I want to talk about that I was suspicious about was that, the intelligence that we got, that kind of drummed up this motion of military assets in the region. Evidently this what's his name? British general. His name is Chris Gika. I'm not sure. Chris Gika. He goes and says, like, this is a British general. By the way, the Brits are also in Iraq, right? They're also in the region. They're a big ally of ours, generally speaking.
We started off with the Brits.
Exactly. So, like, he comes out and he says, like, no, there's no credible evidence of Iran thinking about, doing some shit in the region. We don't have such evidence. And that's troublesome because, all right, this is a general, like a British general, and typically I tend to like give some respect to, military, our military folks, even the British ones, because they are a very close ally of ours. So I see one of two situations out of this. Either A, there is no evidence, and someone on our side, probably John Bolton, is just talking a bunch of bullshit to try and get us to do regime change in Iran. That's one option. The other option is that the U.S. actually does have credible evidence that, Iran is about to do some shit and hasn't, like, told one of our best allies in the world that it might happen. Like, I doubt we're not sharing that information with them. So, and then, it makes you question, like, okay, what about this general, right? Maybe he's a piece of shit and he's just, lying. I don't know. That seems unlikely to me. Like, what incentive would he have to do that?
No, I don't think he's lying. There probably isn't any evidence, and it's just like that vague notion of proxy that they're using to stir up shit.
Right.
Part of me is I don't have any like direct evidence to obviously connect the dots on this theory that I thought of, but I kind of think that the tensions are raising with Iran a little bit more because of that. I think it's kind of part of like the failed coup in Venezuela. There's like, oh man, we couldn't draw blood on that one. So
right. So let's shift gears. Yeah.
Let's take it out on Iran. Let's beat up on Iran. But I think at the end of the day, I think it's all saber rattling. I don't think there's any type of legitimate plan to invade Iran or anything like that. Right. The Pentagon, I don't think has ever endorsed such notions, and I don't think they ever will.
Right.
unless there is an attack on American soil,
Right.
or if there is an attack on like an aircraft carrier or something like that, or a boat, or some servicemen die and they can directly point it to Iran. But they're
Right.
never going to be able to directly point that to Iran. They're always going to directly point that to proxy forces, and the proxy
Right.
forces can always. There's such a case of
Just
plausible
plausible deniability. Exactly.
that you can't like prove that that person
Right.
was killed. You know, that American soldier was killed
Mm-hmm.
because Iran told that person to do it. Like you just will never be able to prove that. Just the same way that you won't be able to prove that America funds Al Qaeda and or did fund Al Qaeda and ISIS and Syria and Iraq. You're not going to be
Right.
able to actually try someone and put someone to jail for that. You can try someone for funding moderate rebels and making a case, but I don't think there's enough evidence to be like you're guilty as charged. But because there's a huge degree of plausible deniability in there.
Right.
But even if you have the suspicion, and even if it's true, then that still becomes a vague notion.
Right.
All right, I'm ranting way too much on this, but I want to talk about before we wrap this up, because I think I want to follow up on an episode of doing the war games thing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think that would be a really interesting topic.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the consequence would be if there was a nuclear bomb dropped in Iran?
Well, I mean, honestly, that's, if we're following Tom Cotton's logic, which I'd like to, the only possible maybe way that we can hit Iran once and that would be it and make it easy would be nuclear weapon. Like if we Nagasaki, Hiroshima them, what would the implications be? Holy shit. All right. Well, first of all, millions of people will die, like indiscriminately. There's no going around that when you use nuclear weapons, nuclear force. There would be serious environmental damage, right? We'd be talking about like nuclear fallout for years, right? And there's and I mean, Iran is a pretty densely, it's a pretty big country, but it's still close enough to other countries. It's not like Japan. Japan's a fucking island, right? When we bomb them with smaller and less powerful bombs, they were able to clean up Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was hard, but they were able to do that. And it didn't affect any neighbors because they're in the middle of the ocean, right? We're talking about like, there are countries that are bordering them. And some of those countries are our friends or that we have interests in or that our allies have interests in. This would cause serious, like ecological, economic, like issues. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it would be really bad if there was a nuclear bomb dropped in Iran. There would be like that. I'm no expert on this topic, but I would imagine that there would be kind of like a radiation
Like fallout?
contamination, fallout zone that would affect like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria,
sure.
Turkey, pretty much any country that borders the Caspian Sea. I mean, I guess it really depends on where you drop that bomb.
Right. If you go Gulf Coast
assuming,
area,
I'm
then
assuming
we're
if they
talking about UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, like places like that might be affected nominally. But more importantly, I think even outside of the radiation effect, I mean, there would be serious economic issues happening there, right? Like nobody would want to ship oil around like near the nuclear zone. Like that'd be crazy.
Yeah, well, most of the oil is in the south of the country, and I would imagine if they were going to drop a bomb on it, they would do it in the north of the country.
Yeah, where all the people live.
Yeah, like where the people live. It would be somewhere around Tehran.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that would affect. Maybe it would. I honestly don't know what they would use or like, or if they would be like a tactical nuke, and
it would be bad.
It would be bad regardless, but
yeah.
I guess the major point is that there's probably not a military solution to Iran.
No.
And I think, here's my opinion, I think the best thing you could do is just like let Iran be and see what happens if you just like don't sanction them. If you just try not sanctioning Iran for 5 years, Just do a plan, like a self-help plan. Like, let's just try my way for a couple of years, see what happens.
But they'll get the bomb, Henry.
Yeah, it's like try not to have an aggressive policy with them for, I don't know, 5 years. If they get too out of line, then let's just say if they are a threat, then
Well, look,
see what happens within the country. If the population, if they stay in line with the hardliners, or if they start to realize that all this cool stuff from the West is coming inside our country and we want to be more like them, and we want to get like, I mean, they do get like European cars and stuff, but I think that there would be change,
be economic change for them. Yeah.
If you just like, or if you trade with somebody, I think that's the best way to change.
It's the reason why we don't fight with China, because we have like we're making money with them.
Yeah. If you trade, if you trade with somebody, and I think the most important thing is to export your culture.
Right.
Because if your culture is better than another culture, then your culture is going to be adopted.
Right.
Like, I know.
Well, maybe not better. If your culture is stronger than another culture.
If your culture, it sets up a circumstance where you're going to more likely be successful, it will be adopted. Like, that's why Western culture values were adopted in Asian countries, like Korea and Japan. They've adopted, European Western values. They're not running, like, doesn't have samurai swords anymore. They have business cards and Hondas.
And presentations.
Pokemon.
Which, by the way, hell yeah, dude, it's cool. I'd recommend it if you didn't see it.
I'm thinking about it.
So, like, it's a kid's movie, so keep that in mind. Like, the plot is a little kiddie, but I was just geeking out the whole time. Like, oh my God, that's a Charizard, or like, oh shit, check out that Jigglypuff, and like, just like how cool it looked to see Pokemon, how they should look in real life. It was super cool.
Starring Ryan. How was Ryan Reynolds?
I liked it. He was funny. It was good. Again, a little bit kiddie, but Ryan Reynolds did throw in a couple of jokes there that are definitely intended for the adult audience, and they were raunchy. But like, they were able to get rid, like, I'm not going to spoil it. The jokes that he told, there was 2 of them that I was like, oh, like, how did they get away with that?
You can slip some stuff by. Like, Disney films typically have some sex jokes in them, or like some subliminal sex messages.
I don't think it was pretty liminal. No. It was pretty liminal. Like, everybody in the movie theater was like, just like, oh, like, I just heard everybody going, oh shit. When that happened, like, I brought my girlfriend with me, and she like gasped when she heard the joke, because it's clearly a kid's movie.
What was the joke?
So I forget the context and the setup of it, but it was like, fucking Pikachu, with the voice of Ryan Reynolds, was like, oh yeah, you put your finger in me, or something like that. And it's like, whoa.
What he said? He said fucking
finger in me. Like,
he said the F
put
word.
Your finger inside me. Like, your fingers inside me. Like, the joke was intended exactly how you're thinking.
What he said, he said the F word in the movie?
No F word. Put your finger in me. Like you've got your fingers in me. It's like, I don't know. It's just, none of the words are bad words, but it was just like, whoa, ew. Like, like, I know what you meant, and it's coming out of Ryan Reynolds, and like, for whatever reason, ever since the Deadpool movies, I can only see him as Deadpool. Like, I only hear him as Deadpool. So I just imagine, like, the context. Anyway, I butchered the joke. It was pretty funny, but it just felt like, ew. Like,
I thought you said fucking finger in me, and I thought they dropped an F-bomb in Pokemon.
No.
I was like, holy shit.
Not in a Pokemon movie, no.
They did. All right. Since I'm gonna release this tomorrow, so this will be Friday.
Okay.
Because by Monday, we'll already be at war. We'll already be at war. We haven't fought a good war. There's a war coming, Ned. I don't know with who, but there is one. The whore is pregnant.
I want her dead, Ned.
I want her dead, Ned. Mother, father, child, and her brother, Viserius. Game of Thrones predictions before the last episode comes up.
Yeah, man, fuck this
show. You don't
show.
want to be spoiled, obviously. You probably
like, turn it off now.
Turn it off now. Game of Thrones predictions.
I think Hot Pie is going to sit on the Iron Throne because, frankly, why the hell not? The the writing in this season has just been painful, and like shit that should make sense just doesn't happen, and they're like trying too hard to subvert my expectations, so I'm just coming up with theories of like random stupid shit that definitely shouldn't happen, that I don't know, at this point I feel like probably could happen.
Yeah, I kind of like when we were talking earlier, I kind of reasoned, I kind of had an epiphany where I felt like I predicted exactly what was going to happen on tomorrow in Sunday's episode. I don't know if I should give my I'll just say it. If you're like,
yeah, say it.
Here's what I think is going to happen. Like, I'm going to just nail the points. So they're going to be like, oh, Daenerys obviously killed a bunch of people indiscriminately.
Right.
Murdered like a bad person, just like out of nowhere. She just had a brain tumor and she was like, oh, they all hate me. I'm going to kill them all. Like, she just freaked out.
It wasn't even that. It was like, oh, they all surrendered. I'm going to kill them all.
Yeah. I'm going to kill them all. Like,
just murder everyone.
I'm going to murder women and children now. I'm going to murder your kids. She's shown signs of being ruthless in Game of Thrones a number of times, but she's also showed a lot of
compassion.
Compassion, and she's been gentle in a lot of circumstances,
especially to people, to the common people.
Yeah, to the common people, where she was freeing slaves, she was liberating cities, she was doing all these good things. And she was ruthless, but she was ruthless to people who were her enemies.
Right.
And she would never murder somebody or kill someone if they, at the very least, if they bowed down her, if they bent a knee. And these people were surrendering, and all of a sudden,
bending the knee. Yeah,
they're bending the knee. They're ringing the bell over and over and over again. And she goes ahead. She looks at the people, the Lannister soldiers who dropped their swords. She gets on her dragon, and then she starts running around the city, like King's Landing, like she's a serial killer, like she's a sick maniac. It was the most indiscriminate murder fest ever, because like you can compare it to like firebombing somewhere, but Daenerys was looking like she was 30 yards in the air, maybe at some points like maybe 20 yards.
It wasn't very high up.
She was high.
Pretty low. Yeah.
So she was looking at all these people that she was burning to pieces and crisp, and she saw the women and children. And there was nothing like leading up to that moment in the writing of previous episodes that made me believe that she was capable of mass murder like that.
I mean, it was always like a trope for like the last, like, I don't know, say like 4 or 5 years, that it's possible that she can go Mad Queen, right? Like it was always like a possibility, right? But the speed at which she turned, like what would have made more sense to me and what I would have totally fully accepted was if they decide to, they ring the bells and Daenerys is still pissed because, they just killed Missandei in the last episode, and Missandei was all like Dracarys, so like, I got to do what my best friend said, and light these bitches up. I would have accepted fully if she would have been like, you know what? No, you don't get to surrender. I'm still going to kill you. But if she flew directly to the Red Keep and torched the shit out of that, my problem was, instead of going right to the Red Keep and killing Cersei immediately, she just decides to torch all the people on the ground, like all the villagers and shit, like the folks of King's Landing. It's like, dude, just go kill the bitch that chopped off your friend's head. Like, go for them. What are you doing, wasting your time and your dragon breath on like people who have surrendered, had nothing to do with the shit that makes you angry right now, and like what's up with that?
And you sent me that article about that military strategist who had this review saying, well, what she did was logical because Jon has the the rightful claim to the throne due to his heritage and him being male and him being just his direct lineage. He's a better claim.
Right.
So Daenerys' only claim is that she has dragons.
Right. She has fear.
She has fear.
And she said that. Right.
However, though, she had already established that she had dragons. She was called Dragon Queen.
She just lit up an entire fleet. She broke down walls. Like, she killed the Golden Company in like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I'm pissed about. Fuck that.
Yeah, that was so unclimactic. Like,
they didn't even swing a single sword.
They didn't swing a single sword, and they came in as like this extra villain. Like, oh, the Golden Company,
badass. Right.
I wonder what they are. Like, they seem like they probably can do. They're right for a good fight. And they go ahead and they just burn him to death instantly. Like, there's not a single character except that blonde doofy guy who looks
Harry
like
Strickland.
Yeah.
Yo, can we nitpick though on their costumes though? I really didn't like their high-waisted fucking brown pants. If we should put up a picture of this. If you look at the Golden Company, they wear their like chest plate armor and then they take their pants and they put it over their chest plate armor, and like they have like these high-waisted brown pants, and it's just silly.
Golden Company images. The leader of the Golden Company looks like who is he? What actor?
I don't know.
They do have pretty lame outfits.
Look at those pants. Look at how they tuck their armor into their pants. It's like lame.
It is pretty lame. They're like Poindexters of
war.
Essos, right? That's they come from Essos.
Correct.
But yeah, it makes. I don't think that it's unfortunate. I feel kind of cheated.
Yeah. No elephants. No nothing.
No elephants, and I feel a little cheated with this season, just because I really love the show overall.
It's like you made me wait 2 years for this.
Yeah, and I'm kind of pissed off that so when Game of Thrones came out, I was a huge fan instantly.
Yeah, me too.
And I watched the first 2 seasons, and there was nothing else. It was like
nothing else to do, right?
There was nothing else to do because I watched them in like one sitting, and I had to wait a year for the 3rd season. So I started reading the books, and I read the first 2 books, and I didn't read the 3rd book, Storm of Swords. That's the 3rd book.
Yeah, I didn't read Feast for Crows. I thought it was boring.
And so when they came, I was like, I'm going to just wait for the show because I like the show so much, and I feel cheated. So now I'm going to go back and start reading. I'm going to start reading the books again.
I'm actually listening to Fire and Blood, which just came out not too long ago. It's a history book, but it's a history book that George R.R. Martin wrote it, by the way.
A fantasy history book.
Yeah, of course. But it's not like a novel. It's a history book. But it's on the Targaryen history.
Yeah, I've heard about that. It's super
really
interesting.
Good. I'm like halfway through. It's awesome. It's cool.
A guy that I'm super interested in. It sounds.
Oh my God, I'm like super interested in this guy. Like,
I found this Game of Thrones podcast I really really like. It's called Ideas of Ice and Fire.
Oh, neat.
I would recommend it. Ideas in Ice and Fire, and this guy he's a huge book fan, and he's just been tearing apart the show over the past like 2 weeks. So he's kind of like influenced me a little bit.
I mean, I've been holding off my like negativity towards this season for a minute, because I felt like the first couple episodes when people started bitching about how dark it was in the Battle of Winterfell, I'm like, come on, just stop being an ass. Like, it was a cool episode. It was fun, right? Like, there was stuff about it that I didn't love, but like it was like a really well shot, really well done episode. And then the 4th episode came along and they killed Missandei, and I'm like, oh, come on, what are you guys doing? But like, I held off my ultimate negativity. This last episode, I'm just like, come on, I can't even.
Well, I will say one thing. They did. It was the production value.
It was gorgeous. Yeah, it was gorgeous.
Like nothing I've ever seen on a television show in my life.
Yeah.
Too bad gorgeous. They couldn't get too bad the writers were 2 chimps.
Seriously, it like, I wanted so badly to just only enjoy the episode, but like it's not even that they didn't meet my expectations, it's that the choices that they made were so jarring that it broke the 4th wall for me. It's just like, nah, this is weird. This is too strange. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit narratively, you know?
Yeah, it's like, and I've been simultaneously watching the first and second. I watched the first and second season over again, and I'm just like watching the first and second season. I'm like, this show is unbelievable. And the
Right.
third, like the scenes with Tyrion in Tywin.
I love Tywin. I think he's awesome.
I can't stop watching Tywin. Like that's how good. That's how great of an actor.
He's very captivating. Yeah.
How great of an actor. I can't think of his name. The guy who plays Tywin, but he's an incredible actor.
Vladimir Putin.
Peter Dinklage is also an incredible actor, and I'm just like watching. Like, I can't stop watching this. Like this is insane, and they destroyed Tyrion. Like Tyrion is like a dummy now. He's a dumbass who only
boo-hoo, I'm a dwarf and I can't do anything right anymore.
There's nothing cunning about him anymore.
No.
There's nothing like
not even his comebacks are good anymore.
Yeah, he doesn't bring anything to the table at all. He just cries. In the first couple of seasons, the first 4 seasons, he's some awesome guy who comes from out of like right after Ned Stark is beheaded, and like Ned Stark can't play the politics in King's Landing, and then you see Tyrion
total badass, yeah,
and he comes and he dominates the political scene in King's Landing for like you know the first. It's just really awesome to watch, and then he's at odds with his dad, who's like also dominates, but is, you know, who hates him secretly. But it's just like awesome television. They don't have those characters anymore.
Right. Well, they don't have characters anymore. I feel like.
Yeah, they're
just like shitty plot devices.
That's exactly like they don't have characters. Like they kill Tywin off.
I think they just replaced the writers with just Michael Bay because you know, they're like, let's just spend money on Michael Bay. We'll just have a bunch of explosions. No one has to war. No one cares about the plot anymore.
It's obvious that D&D don't the writing duo D&D.
Yeah.
They don't care anymore.
I don't believe that. I think they do care. I think they received a decent amount of pressure from HBO to make like an epic conclusion. And in order to do so, you know, but HBO was also like, you got to do it in two seasons. That's it. Like wrap it up, finish it up.
I heard HBO wanted to do more seasons and they wanted to leave.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I just follow one Game of Thrones nerd, and like I get all my information from one source. That's what he said. So I just kind of like don't question
He's just going off
his authority on the topic. He was like a constant theme in his show is like shitting on D&D, and he's like, HBO wanted to do more seasons and you guys wanted to leave. You couldn't even hand it off to anyone. So apparently word on the street is that the HBO wanted to do more seasons. George R.R. Martin wanted more seasons, and it was the writers who wanted to work on other projects, and I think Star Wars is one of them.
They're working on Star Wars? Oh god.
I think they're working on some Star Wars thing. I've heard
I love Star Wars. They better not ruin that shit.
I've heard the thing. I've honestly haven't researched it, like what their next projects are that they're going to afterwards.
It better not be Star Wars, dude.
But I've heard stuff about Star Wars and Game of Thrones writers in the same sentence. So
and you were like,
I'm just assuming that they're writing the next Star Wars.
Oh my god.
Episode 15. Episode 69 will be written by D&D.
Yeah.
All right. We rambled on Game of Thrones for like a while.
Yep.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. If you're on Apple Podcast, please rate and review the podcast. Give it what you think, preferably a 5-star. We're trying to get the ratings up to I think we're at 109 as we speak. We're trying to get that to, let's be modest. Let's say 120. So rate and review. Whatever platform you're watching or listening on, subscribe and share and like. And we also have a Patreon account.
That's right.
Patreon is the link will be in the description below. We have some additional content in there. We have older episodes and stuff like outtakes and things like that. But we're putting more and more stuff in Patreon. So if you want to support the show, if you really like it, then you can support us there. But again, appreciate the time. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And Danny Abdel-Jabbar, any last words? The whore is pregnant.
I don't want it.
I don't want it.
You're my queen. I don't want it.
You're my queen. He's such a bitch this season. They made him such a bitch. I know. I can rant for another half hour about Seriously. How they made Jon Snow.
Let's cut it here because
you just triggered me. All right, peace, guys.
See ya.